Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for joining today's web conference, the Market Surveillance Committee meeting. Please note that all audience members are in listen-only mode. However, you can raise your hand to ask a question at any time by dialing #2 into your telephone keypad. If, however, you require technical assistance, send a private note to me, the event producer, via the chat panel located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. With that, I'll turn the call over to Dr. Benjamin Hobbs, Chair of the Market Surveillance Committee. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Sorry that we are unlucky on this Friday 13th and can't meet together in person. Those of you would normally be in Folsom. I am actually in quarantine in Maryland myself, but I hope that everybody is and their families are all healthy. And if all goes well, we'll be seeing you in person in our May meeting. Today's Market Surveillance Committee meeting has three major agenda items. Day-ahead market enhancements, where we'll be having a presentation by James Friedrich. And then in the afternoon, we'll be continuing market power mitigation discussion that we were having this last fall. Perry Servideo will be making a presentation. And finally, we'll be having an agenda item on the congestion revenue rights and the performance of the auction revision that were put in place in the last couple of years. And Dr. Guillermo Bautista will be making a presentation there. Because this is a webinar, we will the discussion may be a little bit more confined and less freewheeling than it often is when we're in person. But please let the operator know. Signal that if you want to ask a question, and if it's been and if for some reason we don't see your question or your hand being raised, don't be afraid to do it again, because our interactions are important. On the other hand, during the presentations by staff, we'll generally only take qualifying questions just because it's a little harder to keep track of discussions if it's more freewheeling in the middle of a presentation. So the more freewheeling questions and answers will generally follow after the presentation is complete. Before those major agenda items, though, as usual, we first have public comment on any issue. And although I would definitely prefer to hear about issues that we don't have the agenda, issues that we won't have a chance to talk about on later agenda items. So at this point, I'd like to ask whether there's anybody who would like to make a public comment, and if so, operator, can you again remind people how they can indicate that they'd like to ask a question?
Certainly. To raise your hand to ask a question or give a comment, please dial #2 into your telephone keypad.
And do we have anybody indicating so, operator?
No questions at this time.
Okay. In that case, we'll go to the next agenda item, which is a decision concerning the general session minutes for our last meeting, which was December 6th. And those minutes have been distributed. So let's see, Jim and Scott. Oh, forgive me, I forgot to introduce who's sitting around the virtual table. Before we get approval of the minutes, let me first say that we have Dr. Jim Bushnell and Dr. Scott Harvey from the MSC, as well as myself, Ben Hobbs, chair of the MSC. And then from the ISO, who do we have here? Perhaps people can quickly introduce themselves.
Hi,
maybe
this is
start with Brad. Shami?
This is James Friedrich.
Brad Cooper. Don Trethaway.
That's it.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so back to the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes for the December 6th?
Scott moves to approve the minutes.
I second.
Okay. Dr. Harvey moves and Dr. Bushnell seconds. Any changes, modifications, discussion?
None from Scott. None from me.
Okay, if not, I'll go ahead and let's see. Jim?
I vote yes.
Scott?
Yes.
And I vote to approve the minutes. So the general session minutes from December 6th, 2019 have been approved unanimously. And at this point, we're ready to move to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is the day-ahead market enhancements discussion. The policy lead, and this is Megan, but Megan Poj, but making the presentation will be James Friedrich. Megan, are you also here, or is she not here today?
She would be on a remote line.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. So, okay, James, and hopefully everybody can see this on their screens, and the presentation has also been posted. Okay, James, it's all yours.
Thanks, Ben. This is James Friedrich from the ISO. So today we'll be discussing the day-ahead market enhancements. Just so a brief recap, we posted a straw proposal on the day-ahead market enhancements on February 7th, which a week later followed up with a stakeholder presentation. We also gave a supplemental presentation on March 5th in which some of this material that we'll be presenting to the MSC, we'll be talking about today was presented at that meeting. And just a reminder that the comments for the day-ahead market enhancements are due March 26th, and we hope that this MSC discussion can help stakeholders inform some of their comments. So really the purpose of this discussion is to go over some examples that are intended to highlight some of the benefits of co-optimizing the REN, or reliability energy portion of the day-ahead market enhancements, and also to discuss some potential challenges. And so I really want to emphasize from the beginning that, you know, the REN, or reliability capacity, is sort of the focus of this discussion. You know, what the benefits, is the REN part worth it? What are the challenges and those things? So, you know, that's more where will we be focusing. Of course, there are other parts of the day-ahead market enhancements that are important, but that's where our focus will be today. One moment.
Emmy, you may need to click on the presentation to advance the slides.
Okay. Yeah, we're not able to move the slide. There we go. I don't know what we did. Okay. All good. Okay. So just a quick recap of the day-ahead market enhancements. We are introducing 2 new products to the day-ahead market. The first that we'll be focusing on today is the reliability capacity product. Reliability capacity is intended to meet the difference between the system operator's forecast and cleared bid and demand. It can work both in the upward or downward direction. It's a 60-minute product, so you know, a resource will be capped for providing reliability capacity up or down based on their 60-minute ramp capability. Then there's also the imbalance reserve product, which also moves both in the upward and downward direction. The reference point for the imbalance reserve up and down is the system operator forecast, and the reserve requirements are set based on historical uncertainty observed from you know, net load in real time from the system operator forecast day ahead. Okay. So just to set up the examples that we're going to be talking about today, we need to talk about, what the generator characteristics look like for our examples. So we're going to have 3 generators in our examples. Each have a Pmin and Pmax 0 to 100, make the numbers pretty simple. Each generator has a ramp rate of 2 megawatts per minute, which is relevant only for the fact that we can assume that a generator can receive their full capacity in the reliability capacity. And the energy bids from each of these generators are ascending from left to right, varying between $20 and $30 per megawatt hour, and each generator has a range of RCU and RCD bids. So these generators will be constant throughout the examples. Also, just to note, these examples are all going to be single node examples. There will be we won't be considering congestion or losses when we're talking about prices. And also for stakeholders, these examples in terms of their prices and dispatch are all informed through a solver that we published May of 2019, the IFM RUC co-optimized solver in Excel. So if anybody was interested in sort of creating their own examples or making little tweaks to see what happens, we encourage folks to mess around with that tool. So the first scenario we're going to talk about is a sort of a comparison between a sequential optimization of energy and capacity compared to a co-optimized energy and capacity scenario. And so scenario A is the sequential version, which we maintain can lead to less efficient scheduling. So in this example, we have load bidding in at 225 megawatts for $24, and we have a system operator forecast of 225 megawatts. And so on the left-hand side, we are only optimizing for energy, and so we can see that in doing so, generator 1 will receive a 100 megawatt schedule because their energy bid is lower than load is bidding, and none of the other generators receive an energy schedule. Then on the right-hand side, we sequentially then optimize for RUC in this case, and what we have is generator 3 gets a 100 megawatt RUC schedule, and generator 2 gets a 35 megawatt RUC schedule based on their RUC bids. And so we also list out the objective cost. The objective cost is, it's easiest to see what the objective costs are by opening the solver, but just quickly, essentially what the objective function is doing, since this is a day-ahead market, the objective function in this case are trying to maximize the surplus when setting quantities for energy and RUC. And so on the left-hand side, I'll just quickly go through that we get an objective cost of negative 400 because for every 100 megawatts of energy scheduled on G1, that load says they value through their bid at $24. G1 is willing to sell at $20, and so it's capturing $4 of surplus essentially for every 100 megawatts sold. That's where the negative 400 comes from. And so you can think that it's better in these examples to have, the more negative the objective cost is in these examples, the better. And similarly on the right-hand side, objective cost of 450 represents the cost or the bid times the quantity of each G3 and G2's RUC schedules and the combined objective.
And James, this is just the RUC costs?
Right, just the RUC costs on the right-hand side. And you by combining the objective costs between the sequential optimizations, you get $50. And I just also want to point out that we recognized in the slides to stakeholders that the combined objective cost and the objective cost on the right-hand side had the wrong sign. And so this is the correct, these are the correct numbers here. Okay, so then we want to pay attention to the combined objective cost on the bottom of the screen on this slide, which comes out to be negative 250, and that compares to positive 50 from the previous slide, which essentially means that by co-optimizing the energy and capacity in this example, the optimization has generated an additional $300 of surplus, and I'll sort of walk through how that works. So we can see that in this slide, when the capacity and energy are co-optimized, G2 received a 100 megawatt energy schedule. And the reason why G2 receives a 100 megawatt energy schedule is because the co-optimized version recognizes the trade-off between energy and capacity. So the optimization recognizes that while load is stating their willingness to pay at $24 and G2 is willing to sell at $25, that represents sort of a negative $1 of loss for every megawatt scheduled on G2. However, what we have avoided is 75 megawatts of RCU on G3 that costs $2 and 25 megawatts of RCU on G2 that costs $10. And so the optimization says, well, it's worth it to schedule G2 for energy to avoid the trade-off of that higher cost capacity. Well, higher cost in the sense that it's worth sacrificing the negative $1 for that 100 megawatts than it is to pay, you know, $2 and $10 for the remaining RCU. So why don't I stop there and see if there's any comments or questions.
Again, to ask a question, please dial #2 into your telephone keypad. No questions at this time.
Okay. So what we hope to have shown is that by co-optimizing the energy and the reliability energy, it can result in more efficient pricing and scheduling of reliability capacity. I guess one thing I also should mention is that in the co-optimized example, the marginal price for RCU in this case is $2 because the incremental RCU would come from G3, and in the scenario A, the marginal cost for RUC is $10 because the marginal RUC resource is G2. And so we think that co-optimizing the energy and the reliability energy, which considers the avoided RCU or RCD costs when scheduling physical supply, can lead to a more efficient unit commitment in a sequential process. And we'll also talk about in the following slides how under this design, we maintain that the entire REN schedule needs to be settled for physical resources to be paid consistent with their bids, and we'll see how that works. So I'm going to go through 4 new examples, and I just want to set up what we want to think about when looking at these examples before I show them. And so what happens is the REN co-optimization can result in different scheduling and pricing implications depending on who sets the price, be it supply or load. And so in scenarios 1 and 3, we're going to see supply setting the price and what price and scheduling impacts there can be from that. And in scenarios 2 and 4, load is setting the price. We can discuss the price and scheduling impacts when that happens. And I also want to point out that, the scenarios were put together to clearly illustrate how the N and the REN LMPs work for stakeholders. And so we don't necessarily pretend that these examples show an exhaustive list of the REN benefits or, the trade-offs with REN, but the scenario should be enough to, generate some discussion about how REN works. So starting with scenario 1, granted we still have the same 3 generators in these examples. We have load bidding in for 125 megawatts at $50 and a system operator forecast of $155. So we'll start with energy and how that gets scheduled. So G1 on the left-hand side will get 100 megawatt energy schedule because their energy bid is lower than load's bidding. And G2 will get the remaining 25 megawatts because they're the next lowest bidder. And we need 30 megawatts of RCU in this example, and so that's going to be scheduled with G3 because it has the lowest RCU bid. And so how the LMPs are working in this example, the energy LMP is reflecting the trade-off between energy and RCU. So how we can think about that is if load bid for 1 unit more of energy, they would get it from G2 at $25, but they would have to but they would save $2 by not having to provide a unit of RCU to G3. 25 minus 2 makes 23. And the $2 REN LMP simply reflects the marginal cost of RCU in this case, where if you were to increment the forecast by 1 unit, then the marginal cost of that would be $2. And the sum of the energy and the reliability energy LMPs makes the marginal energy supplier, who in this case is G2, hold to their energy bid. And also that the implications of these prices is that load will pay $23 per megawatt hour for their energy schedule and be allocated the $2 for the reliability energy schedule that overlaps with their energy schedule. So I'm seeing there's a question in the queue, so I will pause for the MSC to weigh in, or if we want to go to the phones.
Let's see. First of all, was there anybody from the MSC who wanted to ask something at this point before we go to the queue?
No, you can go to the queue for me.
Yeah, go to the queue.
Okay. Operator?
Caller, your line's unmuted.
Yeah, hi James, this is Mike Castellano from Energy Division of the CPUC. So on your scenario A and scenario B, looking at this quickly, I think the efficiency that you're getting out of this is largely a result of the bidding assumptions you've made, right? Like if the relative energy bids and relative RUC bids aren't lined up just this way, then you get a different result, and it's not necessarily you don't necessarily have a difference in efficiency between these two, I think.
So if we had, a good example is if we had $0 RUC bids and $0 RCU bids in both cases, we'd have the same objective cost. But the co-optimized will at least be equal to or greater than the sequential, meaning that, and in fact, by having these non-zero bids, it increases the case, it strengthens the case for the co-optimized example, we think. And the reason why we think that's important is looking toward EDAM, where resources are not going to be bidding zero in for RCU.
Okay, so this, you guys see this
I was going to hold
primarily as
this
a
till
change
later, but
sorry, Jim.
Oh, sorry. I think there's a dimension here of the magnitude of the RCU bids, and then there's also the monotonic relationship. I think maybe what Mike was getting at was the fact that you have, the middle cost generator having the most expensive, or you have really an inverse, you don't have a monotonic relationship between the generating cost and the RCU costs.
Right, yeah.
And I've been trying to think about what the implications of that assumption are. And it's just hard to evaluate this kind of in a bubble without thinking about what the implications for real-time energy production are as well, which I think we'll probably talk about more as we get to the end. But in the sense of like how does this day-ahead dispatch sort of imply the real-time provision of energy will be provided under the assumption that the forecast is correct, which is a whole other set of issues. But if we assume the forecast is sort of energy, I think we need to think about how this day-ahead alignment and the costs implied by it then also contribute to what the cost of supplying the energy forecast in real time will be.
Yeah, and I suppose to Mike's comment too, that when the efficiency that I'm referring to, I guess, would just be the mathematical, in terms of how the objective function is set up and doing it sequentially versus co-optimized.
Right. And just one of the last things you said there was that you guys see this as mostly being necessary for the EDAM. So this is, a point that I've raised a few times, and I think it's important for the MSC. I'm sure they realize this, but it's important for them to also recognize the fact that this is really something that you guys are doing. You're talking about changing the pricing structure in California in order to have this broader market that, there's just so many questions on this, and I think so much uncertainty about it. And I think, I don't know, really worrisome to me.
So, Mike, I think the point that James was trying to make is that we do see benefits independent of EDAM with having people reflect their availability cost, real-time availability costs in the RCU bids.
But Don, those costs right now are reflected in, for the most part, in RA contracts.
That's correct.
So you only get this benefit in California if we renegotiate all the RA contracts, get all those costs out of the RA contracts, and then get them into the market like this. And I think, one, that there's a lot of sort of transaction costs between now and when we get all that done, if it happens. Two, if you guys, some of the way that you're talking about setting the real-time bidding requirement looks like you're not setting it to the same level that we currently have the RA requirements. And so the CPUC would have to say, all right, we're not going to require RA resources to be available in real time. We're just going to rely on the CAISO's numbers, which, what you guys have shown so far is we're going to let the real time fall short, like, 5% of the time? So it's not clear to me that would be something that the state has an appetite for.
Mike, this is Brad. You know, if our guiding principle was never to make a market change because it required renegotiating contracts, we wouldn't get done a lot of what we have gotten done. You know, look at the 15-minute market that required a lot of contract negotiation.
I understand. That's not what we're talking about now, though. You're saying you want to make a market change because it's beneficial, but I'm pointing out that the only way it's beneficial is if those contracts get renegotiated. And I'm saying
I'd like to jump in a little bit. You know.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll come back after you finish.
No, go ahead.
I was done.
I think one thing about these examples that's a little artificial is that we're focusing on the benefits from these RCU bids, whereas if we go back, the core logic for doing it simultaneously is because you're not doing a two-step unit commitment. And that gets much more complicated to make an example about. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of that's really an important element of the efficiency of when you commit units to clear the energy schedules, you also recognize you're going to have to commit units for the reliability instead of doing it in two steps and potentially committing different units, having fewer units online, and that's much more, you know, I understand why the CAISO hasn't put that in this example because it becomes much more complicated to make an example. But as a result of focusing this benefit illustration on the bids, it's a little bit artificial, which I think leads to Mike's comment that it all relates to these bids, which it does. But that's not the whole of the benefits. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's a more complicated part to make an example of regarding which units are committed and do we have too many units scheduled for tomorrow, et cetera.
Yes, and this is Brad. I'd also point out that the RCU reflects the cost of being available in real time, which then the market can optimize the resources, based on their actual cost that day of being available in real time. They don't have a day-ahead energy schedule, which that can't be accomplished just by reflecting those costs in RA contracts. I mean, am I getting that right as far as the benefit versus the RA paradigm?
Sorry, what?
So, operator, we have, Mike, did you have more? I'm sorry.
No. Brad, were you asking me a question?
Yeah, no, I guess I was directing that at the MSC. My point is that Mike, you're saying that the RIN payment should just be covered or should be recovered through RA contracts rather than in our market. My point was that the advantages of having that cost in our market is that the market can look at each generator's bid to be available in real time and optimize it accordingly. For example, if those costs are just covered in RA contracts, the market doesn't know that a unit in the constrained gas system in Southern California has a higher cost of being available than a unit out somewhere else, not on the constrained system, where if you put the costs into our market, then the market knows about it and can pick the resource with the lower cost of lining up gas to potentially be available to be scheduled to provide capacity.
Okay.
Okay, so we have 2 other questions in queue.
Yes, we do. Next caller, your line is unmuted.
Good morning. This is Gong Wen from Puget Sound Energy. I'm just curious, as the EIM entity and the potential EIM entity participating in the future, you said something about the cost of being available in real time, but that is very unclear. What does it mean by cost of being available? Is it more of the short-term cost that should be reflected in the RA bid, or it should be also the investment cost in building the power plant?
No, my comment
other fixed costs as
we're referring to incremental costs to schedule pipeline capacity and schedule gas that you may or may not use. You know, for example, if they got if they have to buy gas to have it available, you know, if there are constrained gas system conditions, they have to buy gas and nominate it in the day-ahead time frame, and they buy it and nominate it on a relatively expensive day, and then the next day we turn out not using them, so the supplier has to unload the gas at a loss. You know, that represents a cost.
So just to make it clear, the ISO is thinking that just the cost of fuel being available is the one that should be reflected into the RA bid, but nothing else than that at this point.
Well, presumably there's other costs. You know, you know, for example, there could be staffing costs that you don't have if you don't have to stand ready to be available.
Yeah, we talked for hydro generators on Cascade systems. They might have costs of posturing their system to be able to deliver the energy in a particular hour, because it might affect how they schedule their water use over the entire day. So if you don't pay them anything for it, they're not going to do it. But if you you know, let them offer, they can tell you what it would cost to rearrange their water use and hold it available.
Without distracting the conversation too much, does anybody want to, maybe James, you could tell us a little bit about mitigation of these bids, how this fits into local market power mitigation? You know, what these bids for REN be, some RCU and RCD somehow be verifiable or registered or something else?
Yeah, we would have to develop a process by which we would mitigate the RCU and RCD bids, as well as the imbalance reserve bids. And we haven't proposed an approach to do that, but we recognize that we need to do that given that we're going to procure locally or nodally.
Are we ready?
Okay, thank you. Operator, was there a second call in the queue?
There was. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, good morning. It's Mark Holman with PowerX. I wanted to come back to something Dr. Harvey said, which I think is a really important point. Actually, 2 points. One is it's always hard with numeric examples to get the full benefits of this approach through. I think we'll see that in example 4 where we don't have virtuals in there, and I think if you add virtuals to example 4 when we get there, you'll see that it actually leads to a different outcome, and bid in demand does get the right outcome. But on this particular example, and the point that Dr. Scott Harvey made, I think the really important point here is the co-optimization and how the grid has evolved. And, you know, putting EDAM aside, which I think it's critical that an EDAM be a physical market where enough flexibility and capacity is committed through a co-optimized way, but just from a CAISO BA perspective, that the goal, of course, from an efficiency perspective should be to lower production costs. And we've seen that as the grid has evolved, ROC, as well as exceptional dispatch and load biasing to the extent that's needed for capacity, is not something that's rare anymore. It's something that's routine and large and happening, which means the operators and the CAISO, after the IFM has run, is having to use sequential processes to acquire flexibility, but also often to acquire capacity to ensure they have enough resources. And when that becomes so sizable and so frequent, and it's happening in a sequential manner, it really does point towards we're not achieving market efficiency and minimizing production costs, because we're not able to select which resources get awarded energy versus ancillary services versus an RCU type award, a capacity commitment, or versus flexibility. And so I understand that depending on the different circumstances, you can get a scenario where someone might be worse off in getting a more efficient market because we're lowering production costs. I also understand that doing a sequential process can lead to different price outcomes, but it raises production costs. And the analogy I always use is think about ancillary services. You know, if we went backwards, we could say, why don't we buy spin and non-spin and even reg up and reg down through a sequential process, and just how inefficient that would be. And the fact that we need those every hour and we need a certain quantity of those, and we do that through a co-optimized process in all organized markets, I think this is just reflecting the evolution of the grid and the need to acquire day-ahead flexible reserves, which is outside of today's discussion, but part of the DAME, and the need to acquire sufficient capacity, separate from the flexibility needs, making sure the physical energy plus RCU plus your upward flex can meet that capacity requirement, so we're not doing these large systemic post-IFM procurement processes to meet that capacity, and it really needs to be co-optimized to achieve that least or lowest production cost outcome. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Anybody else in queue, operator?
We did have one caller raise their hand again. Caller, hey. Your line is unmuted.
This is Mike Castellano with the CPUC. I just, going back to a point that Jim Bushnell made a couple minutes ago and responding to what Mark Holman just said, none of this is really dealing with production costs. This is the IFM. One of the things we don't have here is how any of this relates to real time. And that's another really important issue that we have to think about. But also this whole, there are too many things going on in the market. We obviously need to change something. That argument, I've said this a few times, and I don't think anybody's really disputed it, but one of the reasons that we don't have the flexibility and everything in the real time right now is because the real-time flexible ramping product is not working effectively. And I know the ISO is in the process of fixing that, but until we see how well that fix, what that fix does for us, redesigning the day-ahead market seems really premature. Thanks.
Yeah, and this is Brad. I'd add we should be careful that we're not starting to mix issues because the out-of-market operations the operators are taking in the day-ahead time frame, load biasing, that's to address the uncertainty, which is what the imbalanced reserve product we're proposing is, and we're not arguing that this addresses the need for the operators to make adjustments in the RUC process. That's what we're proposing the imbalanced reserve product for, and we agree with you, Mike, that we need to approve the flexible ramping product. I guess your argument is maybe we don't need the day-ahead imbalanced reserve product. We just need to fix the real-time flexible ramping product. But I think we should remember that the debate about RIN should be whether the benefits that Mark Holman is pointing out and Scott pointed out of unit commitment through the co-optimization is worth it.
There are many moving parts in the IFM and then the real-time markets, and I've been guilty myself of doing simulations of day-ahead markets followed by real-time markets, all the possible realizations to assess whether a FlexiRamp product overall improves production costs. It's very involved, and the results depend on detailed assumptions of all sorts. But however, I do in general agree with what Jim said, is that you do need to at some point look down the line and say, well, how does this impact things in real time? Is this in general going to put you in a better position or not? considering your flexibility to react to surprises in real time, as well as your overall commitment costs, which, for example, Scott was focused on. And Brad, I agree, this raises a larger set of questions. I think this has been useful to make these points, and this particular discussion is narrowly focused on whether we might get more efficient commitment by dealing with RUC in this manner. But we shouldn't, in the end, we shouldn't forget the interactions with all the other issues such as flexibility, real time, and uncertainty. Mike and Mark, thanks for your questions. Operator, do we have any other questions?
There are no further questions. Just kidding. One person just raised their hand. Caller, your line is unmuted.
Yes, good morning. It's Mark Simons at the Bonneville Power Administration. Just wanted to add to that discussion, you know, BPA is supportive of option 2, and that's really because we commend the work that the ISO and the DMM have done documenting these issues that are observed, the out-of-market actions, the day-ahead to real-time uncertainty, the hour-to-hour ramp and feasibilities that have been shown in the STRA proposal, the price performance analysis, and the quarterly report from 2019. I mean, these really, to us, describe a problem that is in need of a new solution. And from our perspective, that's different than the flexibilities that are also needed in the real-time market. So we've long been a supporter of the imbalanced reserve product as well as the flexible ramping product, because we think they're solving two different things. There's the within-hour uncertainty that needs to be addressed, as well as the hour-to-hour uncertainty that's taken care of in the day-ahead time frame. And as we think about those things, we think about there's three criteria, right? The reliability, the CAISO BA, based on all this documentation, is reliable today from our perspective because of the RUC and the out-of-market actions. Those actions indicate that it's likely that it could be that the market is less efficient than it can or should be, which is exactly what's been described in the first few slides about the co-optimization. And then, as Mike points out, there's the question of extensibility, right? I mean, how does a multi-BA market solution work if each BA is undertaking its own version of a sequential RUC or out-of-market action to its own documented level of competence, whatever that ultimately turns out to be? So that's why we believe that the proposed, all those three reasons, reliability, efficiency, and extensibility, are why we believe that the proposed co-optimized REN product is really key to providing a reliable, consistent market solution. Thank you.
With that, there are no further questions in the queue.
Okay. Thank you. Let's continue, James. Back to you.
So I think what I'll do is I'll go through scenarios 2 through 4, and then there's a recap slide, and I'll stop after that slide. Okay, so scenario 2 is similar to scenario 1 in all ways, except that now load will be setting the price, and load has a lower bid of $21 in this case. They have the same bid quantity, and the forecast is the same. So walking through this example, G1 will be scheduled for 100 megawatts of energy. The energy LMP will be set at $21, with load setting the price here. And generator 3 will receive a 55 megawatt RCU schedule, and the REN LMP in this case reflects the marginal cost of RCU, where if you were to bump up your forecast, you need to procure additional RCU that's costing $2, so that's where the $2 comes in. So this example is, and we'll talk about this in the recap slide, but you know, this example you know, brings up some issues in the fact that this RCU on generator 3 you know, essentially if the generator 3 was bidding $3 for this RCU, the price goes up to $3 and so on and so on, and so the trade-off is there. And so there's some element of not being able to control the REN cost in this case. Now, obviously load could be bidding a different way, but if they were bidding in this way, they would be unable to control that REN cost in a way. So in example 3, so example 3, the load bid will be the same as in example 1, just now we're going to be reducing the forecast, and so procuring RCD. And so walking through how this will get scheduled, generator 1 will receive 100 megawatt energy schedule, and the remaining 25 will be scheduled with generator 2. Generator 1 will get the 50 megawatt RCD award because they are the lowest RCD bidder. And notice that although generator 3 has the lowest RCD bid, they can't receive RCD because you have to have an energy schedule to receive RCD. And so the energy LMP in this case reflects the trade-off between providing energy and RCD. And to think about that, if load was bidding for 1 extra unit, we would get that unit of energy from generator 2, $25, and have to buy an additional unit of RCD at $5, the sum of which is 30. And then the -5 LMP on REN reflects the marginal price of RCD, whereas if you were to increase your forecast by 1 unit, you would need to buy 1 less unit of RCD that costs $5. So that's why it's -5. And again, in this example where the LMP or the supply is setting the price, the sum of the N and REN LMPs work out in a way that makes the marginal energy supplier, that's G2, hold to their energy bid. In the last scenario, the only thing that's changing is load's bid price has gone down again to $21. Same bid quantity, same forecast. What we have here is an energy schedule on G1 of 75 megawatts. Now that is different than what it would have been scheduled in a sequential process, meaning if we first optimized for energy in this with these same bids, G1 would have received a 100 megawatt energy schedule. And the reason why the co-optimized example sort of stops them at 75 is because of the trade-off of having to provide RCD if you go any higher. So the LMPs are set at 21 and -1, the 21 coming from load setting the price, and the -1 comes from, the best way that I can communicate it is essentially reflecting the lost marginal value to load of the REN power balance constraint. And what I mean by that is, you know, if this forecast were to go up by 1 unit, load would be happy because they can receive a unit of energy that they value at $21, you know, from a supplier that's willing to sell it at 20. And so that's where the -1 comes in, because essentially the REN power balance constraint, you know, incorporates that trade-off there. And so to recap, you know, what we really want to talk about is, do the REN co-optimization benefits outweigh the impacts, these funny impacts that can occur when load's setting the price? And I'll just say again that, you know, like we've heard from commenters, that these examples you know, they're simple examples and they can't possibly illustrate all of the potential benefits of the co-optimization. But we think that we can demonstrate through these examples that in comparison to a sequential approach, like we saw in comparing scenarios A and B, that the co-optimization introduces some scheduling and price efficiencies in that example. But, you know, there are some potential adverse impacts when load setting the price. So, you know, in recapping scenario 2, you know, loads potentially exposed to a REN cost that, in that case, they can't avoid. In scenario 4, load is prevented by the optimization from procuring its desired day-ahead energy position. Like I said, if it was a sequential process, load would have procured 100 megawatts, but the co-optimized version stops them at the forecast. So that's potentially problematic. And in scenario B, it's the opposite example, where in a sequential version, load only clears at 100, but because the energy and capacity are co-optimized, load is sort of forced to procure more energy than its desired day-ahead energy position in that case. So scenario 4 and scenario B sort of work in opposite directions. So I'll stop there and open it up for discussion, questions.
We do have one caller on the line already. Caller, your line is unmuted.
Hi, yes, good morning. It's Mark Malone Parks. That was a good description. I think it's really helpful, though, to talk about the limitations of some of these examples. And I think maybe I'll start with scenario 4, because I know you're trying to describe these outcomes here, but I'm not sure that description's quite right. So if we look at scenario 4, and we say load is prevented from acquiring its desired position, I think that just reflects the limitation of the example. Load has bid here at $21. If you had virtual supply in there at $21 or less, load would be able to buy that position. What's happening here in effect in this example, or what a good example of what this is doing, is that if load's trying to buy at $21 and the only resource available is a physical unit that puts the CAISO into oversupply, and now the CAISO needs to find someone to be willing to deck down and pay them $1, then the cost of awarding load at $21 is not just that physical supply, but the cost of the CAISO having to go pay someone to deck down, to be available to deck down in real time because they're in oversupply. So I don't think that in the co-optimized approach that the CAISO has done so much good thinking about, that looking at these narrow scenarios, we've got to be careful about coming to conclusions, because again, if load bids in, they can clear against virtual supply and get their desired hedge. But if they're clearing against physical supply and that causes a need to have more capacity down, then that is a consequence and should be in the co-optimized dispatch solution and in the pricing process. Can we go back to the last slide again? And I think that you'll see.
I just want to make one comment on this example. With your discussion on virtual supply, doesn't it really come down to whether the virtual supply bidder has the ISO's perspective or the load's perspective? Because if they had the ISO's perspective, they wouldn't want to bid in any virtual supply because they see the forecast lower.
I don't think so, Don. I think it's independent of that. I think the fact is that when you look at bid-in load is a choice, and they're effectively getting a price hedge against whoever's selling on the other side. And if there's physical supply that's available that's inexpensive and it doesn't cause a need for any additional products, then they can clear against that. But if there's virtual supply there, they can clear against that in this scenario 4. The reason they're not clearing here at $21 is because the only option available in this example was physical supply, and it necessitated the CAISO to have more capacity down. And that is a consequence. Just think of a real-world example. If bid-in supply came in really high during the belly of the dock, it caused the CAISO to start up a whole bunch of units, and they were in oversupply, and then they got to a RUC process that now they needed to have down space, and they ended up having to buy more down capacity because they're in oversupply. then that's something we want to consider in that co-optimized process in the dispatch and pricing. If we go to the last slide you were just at as well, I think when we say scenario 2, load is exposed to a REN cost that they can't avoid, load is exposed today to being allocated costs associated with RUC. If the CAISO needs to commit flexible reserves or needs to commit capacity, that is a cost that load is exposed to. Load is not just exposed to what they choose to bid in on their demand, they're also exposed to the costs associated with capacity and flexibility commitments to maintain reliability. That includes ancillary services today, that includes the RUC process, and in this co-optimized approach, they're exposed to RCU costs if the CAISO has to commit more capacity to ensure it has enough capacity available in real time. So I think we've got to be careful about coming to conclusions here in these statements that simply reflect that we haven't really looked at the comprehensive nature of what happens in the real world when you have virtuals in there as well, both day ahead and real time, and really what you're doing is you're co-optimizing the RUC process and getting that into the dispatch and pricing solution.
Mark, this is Don. But the RUC process is just the RCU portion of the example, whereas you have this interaction in terms of how the formulation's done, that there's some, you basically make that RUC payment to the energy schedule as well. I think that's what option or scenario 2 is highlighting.
I'm not sure I'm grasping that, Don. I think that let me say it this way. Right now, RUC is only in the up direction, but the CAISO is increasingly exposed to needing down, and it needs down for flexibility, but it could also get to a place where it needs down for capacity. It's in oversupply, and it needs to back resources down. Those are pretty rare today. There's a good chance that we get this solution live, and RCD might clear it 0 all the time. We don't know, because there might be lots of flexibility available that can clear it 0. But I think what we have to highlight here, Don, is the RCU and the physical energy both meet the capacity needs. If you take an extreme example and you said, I've got a 40,000 megawatt load, forget about uncertainty and variability. If you had 40,000 megawatts of physical energy clear and you were comfortable with that, you don't need any RCU. But if you had 40,000 megawatts of virtual supply clear, CAISO is going to want to commit some units and make sure they have units and have capacity there that's physical to ensure they can meet the load in real time. And so I think what this co-optimization is showing is that both physical resources and RCU and the quantity of flexible ramping up contribute towards the physical capacity needs that the CAISO as operator needs to commit. And that's where virtuals differ. They don't commit that capacity. They both contribute towards energy, but in terms of meeting bid and demand. But the capacity piece, the reason you have that pricing outcome is you need to reflect that if I buy a bunch of physical energy from real physical resources, I don't need to buy RCU because I've got enough. If I don't have enough physical energy committed, I'm going to, in many cases, RUC. And this is bringing RUC into that co-optimization so we can select which get awarded which products to minimize the production cost, which no sequential process can do.
This is Scott Harvey. I want to agree with some of the couple of things that the last couple of people have pointed. Example 4 is very special, and it's telling you something that's true given, the solution tells you something that's true given the numbers that are in there, but we have to keep that in mind. It's saying that it's very expensive to have units able to move down. Now, in the real world, it isn't. In the real world, we don't worry about being able to move units down when we clear them in the day-ahead market because we have lots of units we can dispatch down, and that's just in the price. So this $5 RCD bid, what it's telling us is we're in a world where it's really expensive. We have to do something to be able to lower the output to equal the actual load in real time. And that's why it's expensive to clear the additional energy for load. So some of the feeling that this example doesn't make sense is because I think we all know that those numbers don't make sense. But if this were true, if these were Canadian nuclear units that we had to maneuver down and they had costs of doing things day ahead so that they could be just maneuvered down in real time, then maybe this would be a realistic example. But it's a little, disconnected from California reality. So I think when we see this, the load bids don't clear at 125 because we have this high cost of buying supply that can ramp down. Well, that's true given the numbers we put in there, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that those are very artificial numbers that are pretty disconnected from reality. The other thing is I think as we talk about this stuff, we ought to keep in mind that I think there are three choices that are mixed in here. One is, do we pay for RCU and RUC? And that's independent of co-optimization, because in the scenario A, you're paying for RCU, you're paying for the RUC, so they can schedule the gas, but you're not co-optimizing. So that's a separate decision. And then we're talking about the co-optimizing the energy and the RUC, which affects the unit commitment and the schedules. And I think there's actually a third choice about exactly how you clear energy and RUC, and that's what results in some of the outcomes that people don't like. But it does have some appeal the way it's been structured, but it is a third independent choice. So that's, my thought about, as we talk about these things, to make sure that make sure everybody realizes these are three choices that we've made and need to make.
Scott, can I just follow up and make sure I understand your 1 and your 3. So by 1, which was we're choosing to pay for RUC, do you mean we're choosing to RUC at all, or we're choosing to actually pay units for doing it?
Yeah, well, it's like scenario A. Go back to scenario A, and we're paying. That's a sequential design, but we're paying resources for RUC. So we're not just saying we assume people will schedule gas, even though we don't give them an energy schedule. We assume people will optimize their hydro schedules to be available to provide RUC, even though we're not paying them. That's the current world, but that's probably becoming unworkable. And the CAISO is not the only place that's thinking that's becoming unworkable. So this is both scenarios A and B are paying people for RUC. They're saying we know if you're going to schedule gas in the current environment, you're going to have to pay for it.
And that gets back to the RA contract sort of question and whether that's already paying them and whatever, yeah. Okay, and then on 3, I think what you meant was the question of whether you kind of co-optimize or balance the RUC cost against the energy cost in real time and this would sort of go to an example like this where one unit has high RUC costs but lower energy costs and another unit has very low RUC costs but very high energy costs. Is that what you meant by sort of trying to think about the energy cost?
Yeah, well, particularly I think an example in scenario 1 and 2, where we're saying that we're not just going to simultaneously optimize RUC and energy, but we're going to separately schedule RUC on resources that are providing energy as opposed to just clearing RUC on resources that don't have an energy schedule. And I think, depending how you solve that, you'll get prices that are pretty much the same, but they'll decompose differently. There will be some situations in which I think you'll get different prices. Because you can think of scenario 1 as just having a $25 price for energy and a $2 price for RUC. And that would be consistent with these schedules, right? And so there's
Oh, okay. So
I don't want to pull us off onto another approach, but I'm just trying to make it clear that there are these three separate choices that are in play here.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand your choice 3, and it sounds like it is a little different than what I was saying. So when you mean energy, you're still talking about the day-ahead energy and how that is compared. And, I mean, I guess there's a fourth dimension, which would be, you know, which units to RUC, and should we care about their energy bid when we're choosing which unit to RUC.
Right. Well, the philosophy of the RUC is that if load 1 cares about the energy cost, they should bid in the day-ahead market.
Mm-hmm.
So when they don't bid, whereas the ISO is saying we know better than load what the forecast is going to be, so we're going to commit capacity. But the question is, if load is right, if the load serving entity is actually right, do they want the ISO to be not only scheduling capacity but also buying energy to meet their needs when they think they're right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is partly a question about who's closer to the customer, who's closer to what's going to happen, and
yeah, I've been thinking about this when trying to think about how to evaluate the overall kind of surplus. I think a tough element here is how to view the downward sloping demand in the day-ahead market, because this design, or basically operations sort of implicitly assume that the downward sloping demand in the day-ahead market is a shift to real-time purchases rather than a truly price-responsive demand. I think that assumption is pretty defensible. I think it's worth considering whether it will be forever, but it changes sort of how normally economics would think about clearing a downward sloping demand curve. If you don't think of it as truly demand that has a value of consumption and that would go away if the price rises too high. And so it seems like there's two important underlying assumptions behind all this operation, which is one, that the ISO's forecast is in essence better than the kind of wisdom of the market that is coming to the day-ahead market with demand bids, and that the slope to the day-ahead demand bids are pure arbitrage rather than some kind of physical price-responsive demand.
Well, given expectations about their intermittent output the next day. Some of these load-serving entities have intermittent resource output, so what do they think it's going to be? How much do they think they need to buy? What do they think rooftop solar is going to be tomorrow?
Right, but that's more of a number rather than a slope, isn't it? So if the load-serving entities have better information, and I do think that's an important consideration here, because this is basically underlying the notion that the market is not discovering that number better than the ISO's forecast is. But there's also the fact that, okay, why are they bidding a downward slope? If we think that is all pure arbitrage, then that gets us to a construct level. But if at some point we think there is actual price responsive, maybe behind the meter storage or something like that, then it makes sense to adjust the real-time forecast, or adjust the forecast basically, or add a slope to the forecast maybe is the way to put it. If we do think that some of this day-ahead demand bid is actually reflecting some kind of price response. And that's where, it seems like we're basically assuming that any slope in the day-ahead demand bid is virtual. And what are the implications of that?
With that, there are no further questions.
Okay, thank you. James?
Okay, so we only had one more slide past this summary recap, and one additional topic that we'd like to discuss is the difference between physical and virtual supply being settled at different LMPs at the same node, and whether or not that's appropriate. And so, one example that, if you look at, say, scenario 1, one consequence of, I guess, decomposing that energy costs between the N and REN LMPs is that generator 1 receives, $25 for their energy schedule, where if there were any virtual supply that cleared in this, they would receive $23 from the energy LMP and not anything from the reliability energy. So we would just like some, discussion or feedback about, are there consequences to that, or
Well, I think we've said, this is Scott Harvey, I think we've said in some of the previous meetings that it is an attractive feature that, to the extent that if virtual supply bids are submitted and they require the CAISO to submit, to schedule additional RUC supply because the load's already lower than the CAISO's forecast, then assigning those RUC costs to the virtual supply and right in the market is a good price signal. Because increased virtual supply requires the ISO to commit buy additional RUC, so they shouldn't be paid the same price as physical supply, which does not require the ISO to buy RUC.
I think that intuition's very strong. I keep trying to think through what the equilibrium implications are in terms of how that might affect a virtual bid, how that might affect the temptation to have an import, for example, be physical instead of virtual, or so whether there's temptations to try to recreate a physical, forget what we used to call them, but the bids that are in practice virtual, but not in spirit, or nominally physical, but in intention virtual. And
things like changed forecasts for either renewable output or load, the sort of thing things we want to know.
And I mean, back to the earlier discussion about trying to think through what the implications of these different choices are for the real time. I think that also feeds back into what the virtual bids would look like. But it is true that to the extent we run the system in a way where there are just higher costs when we buy more from virtual than from physical, then to a first order, it makes sense that the unit that is imposing higher costs have some cost allocation associated with it.
Which we have now, but by an uplift rather than through market prices.
Yeah, I was trying to come at how different is that really then, given that we do have some cost allocation already that's different. Is this going to be just a more precise signal, or is it going to feel more or less the same?
Well, in this case, it would be a marginal signal as opposed to taking a lump of cost and dividing it by virtual, in which case it has more of an average flavor. So conceivably, it might be more efficient if it's on the margin. I don't know if that means we'd expect
more,
it to be higher.
Right. It's not so much the allocation, it's the fact that the marginal cost of RUC is basically, instead of the average cost of RUC, is what's being allocated.
Right. The average cost might be quite low, for example. Right. The marginal cost might be high, which would then provide more incentives to disguise one as virtual as a real physical, or vice versa. More of an incentive than we have now. Might be interesting to look at some numbers, for the magnitudes of uplifts that we've seen, and but of course we don't have bids for this.
Right, the costs will be greater because now some of that's in the RA costs. So the RA customers are paying the costs that aren't borne by the virtuals.
So the average cost will be quite low because, even if the marginal unit wasn't RA, the RA units are providing it for either quote unquote free or as part of a bundled contract, depending on your perspective.
Right, and then there will be times where the cost might be quite high just because of the gas situation. So you'll see variations from day to day that you wouldn't see now. It might be quite low most of the time, or negligible, but that would be reflecting what the actual circumstances. One hopes. Sounds like we're saying it's going to be a little bit hard to tell until we have some experience with this, because we don't have a great sense of how these costs vary across generators or from time to day to day, depending on the tightness of gas and so forth.
Hey, Ben, this is James, and I'm seeing there are 2 questions in the queue if you want to take those calls.
That'd be great. Operator?
First caller, your line is unmuted.
Hey, this is Roger Avalos, Department of Market Monitoring. You guys just had the discussion, basically what my question was meant to prompt, which is about implicit virtual bidding, which is, I guess, the only thing I can add is that's the term, implicit virtual bidding. But, originally virtuals were kind of added. One of the main reasons was because a lot of people were implicitly virtual bidding. The operators didn't know what supply was real or not, and they thought if you could just have an explicit virtual bid, at least they would know and not have to take, actions out of that. So there's kind of you think about whether there's a second order effect here of creating more incentives to create virtual bids, and there's another third order effect is what are the operators going to do if they start thinking there's more implicit virtual bids out there, right? So I don't know where all this really goes, and I can see how there's there is trade-offs. We already have uplifts now that sort of disincentivize or would incentivize you to rather be implicit rather than explicit virtual. I'd say I'm a little wary about saying, well, we'll just see how it works out, experimenting with our day-ahead market, So, but I think it's something that should be thought about a lot more is what are the effects for implicit versus explicit virtual bidding of pricing these 2 things differently. So I guess to summarize what you guys were saying.
So we can imagine hypothesizing a variety of different circumstances that could lead to significantly different prices for the 2, and then look at those incentives and then ask what sort of inefficiencies might occur. That would be a systematic way, at least to start.
And the market's a lot different than the last time we had a large number of implicit virtual bids. So it'd be worth sort of going through the accounting of exactly how that would work now, and whether there are additional barriers that we think are effective that weren't there before.
Hey, Ben, this is Brad. I think you have a good suggestion. I'm still thinking about scenario. Maybe we move back to scenario 4. And so if I understood what Mark Holman's point was that under scenario 4 that it was that our example here isn't entirely realistic because additional virtual supply could, and maybe I'm misunderstanding Mark's point, but I'm thinking about in scenario 4, if there's virtual supply in there, and there would be additional virtual supply that doesn't come with this negative RIN cost. So that would enable more energy, more load to clear, and so you would actually get additional demand bids could clear above 75 megawatts.
But this is a case where the virtual supply wouldn't require RCU bids, so there'd be no cost to the virtual supply because it would actually avoid the cost to take RCD bids.
And so what would the
incentives? So you can clear the additional load.
What would the incentives be here for virtual bids, virtual demand, or virtual supply?
Well, virtual supply would clear load, and we wouldn't have to buy any RCU for it because our forecast is lower than the load bid. So we'd just be clearing more load against virtual supply,
right? And
we wouldn't need to buy either RCU or RCD. Now, if we cleared additional virtual demand, if they bid high enough for virtual demand to clear, then we'd have to buy RCD.
Or RCU, or no? You mean RCU or
RCD? If virtual demand cleared, that would rise the amount of energy that cleared.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Or maybe displace the physical load. I guess it depends on. Yeah, I guess it displace it in this. So the virtual demand, if bid in higher, it actually drive the price up a little bit and displace the the load bid in at 21.
And so I guess virtual bidders' incentives depend on which view they have, whether they agree with the ISO's forecast or they are more along the lines of what demand is bidding, physical demand is bidding.
Right, and Don made this point about what the real time would be, but I thought, sort of working through this, if load thinks the ISO, if virtual thinks the ISO is right, then, real-time actual demand will be quite a bit lower than what the day-ahead cleared amount is. And so isn't that a good time to sell virtual in the day-ahead market? So it seems like that's that the virtuals are kind of working in favor of enforcing the forecast. Or if the forecast
virtual supply would. So
virtual supply.
So there'd be no charge to virtual supply in this case because there's no need for RCU. So it wouldn't bear a cost. It'd be actually clearing, allowing additional energy to clear. Yeah.
So that's it. I'm sorry, I'm getting that. My mind's working slowly this morning. That the virtual supply agrees with the ISO forecast, you're saying?
Yeah, because they would think the real-time price would be 20, for example, because that would be the marginal unit at 75 megawatts. And so if they could sell at 21, then that seems like a good trade.
Yeah, so if virtual supply agrees with the ISO forecast, then more demand can clear and demand's happy also. But to the extent the virtual bidders don't agree with the ISO either, then demand's in a pickle.
Well, yeah. Let's see. So if the true load really is 125, then then real-time prices would be higher, and they'd have to buy a lot in the real-time market.
Yeah.
Right, but again, that's this artificial result of the RCD bid being high. If the RCD bid were 0, then load would clear 125 at 25, or 100 at 20, 21.
Right.
Ben, I think we had one more caller in queue.
We did. Next caller, your line is unmuted.
Hey, this is Carrie Bentley from the Western Power Trading Forum. I wanted to go back to something Scott said, and then I missed who it was from PowerX who said it. But both of you guys talked about RUC. Maybe it's working okay now, but it might not work in the future. I wanted to push back a little bit on it. All the evidence that I think the CAISO presented is that the day-ahead market isn't working, and that the day-ahead market issues are being imperfectly solved by RUC. But there hasn't actually been any evidence that RUC itself isn't working. I really think that once you get the imbalance product, that clears up 90% of the issues. And so, yeah, if you let those issues keep being resolved by RUC might break in the future, but we're not going to do that, right? We're going to have the imbalance product. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about why you think RUC may not work in the future, Scott. Did you mean that absent the imbalance product, or is there something you're seeing just intrinsic to the RUC design that is unworkable?
Well, it's the problem of we're counting on these resources being available, and if they're gas-fired resources and we're not paying them anything at all for being RUC, we're just saying we're clearing you, and we're not going to give you anything to schedule gas, and the California gas system is constrained on some of these days, and they actually have to spend money to have gas available, or we want to make sure we schedule the RUC in an area where gas will be available as opposed to scheduling on a resource that won't be able to get gas. And the RUC assumption today of if we schedule them for RUC, they'll have gas, they'll be able to operate. Well, the problem is in tight gas markets, that isn't always the case. And we might get lucky and other resources will be there, but if we actually needed those resources to get gas, maybe we should actually pay them and have them a schedule so that they can afford to do it and will do it, as opposed to having to hope that somebody else is actually able to step in and fill the gap.
I guess I don't really understand that argument. Wait, hold on. Let me just ask a clarifying question. Because if gas is bid into the day ahead, they're saying that then it's not an implicit virtual, right? They're saying they're going to be available in real time. I don't see and then RUC is run right.
If they get an energy schedule, Carrie. No, Carrie, if they get an energy schedule, they bid in for energy. Suppose they say, I can generate energy if you clear me at $100, and we don't clear them, and we say, but we expect you to have energy in real time if we need it.
Yeah, because we RUC.
Where exactly did you get the money to schedule the gas since we didn't schedule them for any energy?
That gets to my example that I was responding to Mike a while ago, where today you have two RA resources and they both bid zero in RUC. Assume neither of them have an energy schedule, and you have two RA resources, one on the SoCal gas system, and there's OFOs issued and everything, and constrained gas system, and one elsewhere. Today, our RUC can't differentiate between those two resources. It'd be more efficient to schedule for RUC the resource that doesn't have the gas scheduling costs. But today, our market might pick the resource on the constrained Southern California system because it sees no cost for them to line up that gas that they might have to burn. But under the RIN approach, it would differentiate between those two.
I guess, I'm working through that theoretical issue, but you are paid an RA payment to be available in day ahead in real time. And it's worked before, so I guess you're saying historically when there's been gas constraints, they haven't been so bad to break RUC. We're moving to a renewable system, so it seems odd to base our design on the idea that somehow different gas units will have such different costs that it will be more efficient to add to the day-ahead market, even though by that argument then the only time it'd be inefficient for a gas unit to be RUC'd and then buy the gas and then show up in real time, the only time they'd be screwed if they weren't actually dispatched in the real time, if the RUC requirement was wrong. But you have that same issue with current design because you're clearing them against the CAISO forecast of CAISO demand. So So I don't see it being that much better for gas resources because they have, I would argue, even more risk of getting a day-ahead schedule and then having not actually being able to show up in real time and having that price risk as well as that gas risk. I think it works both ways.
I don't understand how there's any increased risk if you get paid for something than if you have to provide it for free and you have to factor it into an RA contract, trying to guess how much it's gonna cost you to schedule gas and how many days you get scheduled.
Because if you're not actually turned on, if you don't actually get dispatched in real time, then you have to buy back that energy. If you end up over procuring and over scheduling in the day ahead market, right? That's the concern that RUC today, you overschedule. Well, in the future, you're going to overschedule even more because now you're procuring everything to the CAISO forecasted price of demand, giving everyone an energy schedule. So I guess I don't see how that's different. You end up with the same situation where you're telling resources.
So we're not giving you an energy schedule. We're giving you an RCU schedule so they can buy gas, as opposed to they just have to buy the gas and sell it back, and they don't get paid anything for that potential cost. That's the way it is today. And they have to figure it out and roll that into their RA contract.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't see that being a huge issue. I mean, maybe the gas generators can speak up, but that hasn't been shown to be a huge inefficiency, and we haven't, rocked that much. I mean, if that's the only reason, I think that's extremely hypothetical. Right? I mean, do you think that would, in itself, would justify modifying the entire design?
So that's one part of the design. As I said, there are three elements, and the other, the co-optimized unit commitment is usually what people have in mind for the main advantage of doing this jointly, that you're going to commit fewer units because you'll take account of both the ones you need to clear energy and the ones you need for RUC.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's been.
And then the separate rationale, even if we didn't have co-optimization, even if we did it sequentially, I think it'd be better to pay the resources for being available in RUC rather than just assuming that they'll be able to use their Ouija board to figure out how to factor it into their RA contracts.
I mean, maybe. I mean, you're still using.
So, Gary, this is Don.
To determine the offer. I mean, and then the other part is that most RA contracts claw back all RUC payments and its successor. I mean, I cannot possibly understand how you're going to be able to tell people to price their LMP and their reliability capacity bid. And here's why. It's because it's not a co-optimization. It's not an adder to your energy schedule. You're going to bid in, according to your own examples, right? You bid in an amount and you're guaranteed to be made whole to your offer, but not to your aggregate offer, right? You could be taken just as an energy schedule and get your bid. You could be taken for just your capacity payment and just get that, but you're not guaranteed to get the aggregate. So if you have how do you know what to bid? How do you know what will clear? Because your energy schedule, right, will only be. I
don't understand why you think that's complicated.
Can you show me how you would bid that?
That's simple. For the energy, you bid the cost of running, of actually burning the gas, and for the RUC, you bid the cost of what do I have to do to be able to get the gas if I need it, and then if I have to burn it, that'll factor to my bid.
Yeah, but if I get paid, if my energy offer is $25. Then I am not at my desk, so I cannot see your offer or your examples. But if I offer $25 to burn energy, I might end up with getting paid $23 for my energy and $2 for my capacity. I might end up getting paid $10 for my energy and $2 for my
Come on, Callie, what difference does it make? That's $25. You got paid $25 for your energy schedule. They divided it up into two things, but as I said, that's purely the way you divide it up. You could just say we're going to pay you $25 for the energy and we'll pay the other unit for the RCU.
But if I'm a resource and I'm trying to figure out what to bid in the market, and I'm looking at the clearing prices, and I'm trying to say, should I have cleared, should I not? Am I bidding a reasonable offer? Are my costs appropriate for the market? All the things that people do in bidding beyond just, the quote-unquote theoretical marginal, cost of your unit, that makes it impossible to assess the market.
I don't think it does at all. I think you're misunderstanding this. All they have to do is bid $25 and they get paid $25. They bid $20, they get paid at least $20. The sum of the energy price and the RCU price will always equal their bid. That's the common thread. It's always greater than or equal to their bid in all these examples.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Now, the way it's been formulated, it's the sum of the two for the resources that get an energy schedule. And if you really hate that formulation, we could, the CAISO could redo it and have it just be one price for the energy schedule that was the sum of the two.
Could they? Because if you did that and demand and supply settled at the same price and storage, for example.
No, they'd still settle at different prices because you'd have another payment. You'd have these other payments, but the energy would settle at 25.
And then you'd have a side payment? I don't understand how that would work.
Well, you'd still have the RCU for the resource that didn't get an energy schedule, and you'd have different prices for virtual demand and virtual supply.
Oh, I see what you mean. But I mean, if you're a physical resource, could you say, all right, load is going to pay one price and supply is going to pay that same price? Can you formulate it that way? So people like storage don't.
They really are, because the load's going to have to pay for the REN in the real time anyway. The load's going to have to pay for REN.
And it's right now it's cost allocated after the fact, which to me, I don't know how to bid in storage anymore. I don't know how to bid in a gas resource. I think it's much harder than you're saying, but I absolutely don't know how to bid in storage. But if you could formulate it so load and supply actually are settled at the same price, a lot of my objections to this may fall away.
Okay, so your concern here is about how storage would bid in.
I mean, that's the most obvious one, but I don't know how people will assess the market. I look at it, you probably do too, Scott, you're a consultant. You look at LMPs all the time, and you try and figure out where to site resources. You try and figure out, what hedges people need. And if I have these three prices now, I have the virtual LMP price, I have this new SNAC price, and then I have this REN price. It becomes very confusing very quickly to me. What is that?
But I mean, it isn't any different from having, the fact is the LMP is they got a reference bus price, a loss component, and a congestion component, but no one gets worried about the fact they got those three components. What they care about is whether the LMP is greater than or equal to their offer. They don't really care about what the reference bus component was or the loss component was.
You have different resources paying different prices.
No. You absolutely care what the congestion component is compared to the SMAC. I vehemently disagree with that. When you're using the LMP to make business decisions, those components become really important.
Carrie, this is Don. I think it's important to separate into two issues, and I think Scott did a good job trying to do that. With regards to the RCU portion, the portion of that's just capacity, you're clearing consistent with your bid. The question is there a benefit now for your energy schedules to have that decomposed into two parts? The overlapping part that's paid at the RCU price, and then the remainder that gets you whole that's energy that gets you whole to your energy bid. Is there a benefit of doing that?
Well, I mean, I think maybe say that last part again, Don. The benefit to say that again.
So the RCU, where it's pure capacity, looks just like RUC today, or so with an offer price.
The amount above the energy schedule.
The question is, for the portion that's the energy schedule, is there benefits to having it now decomposed into two parts? The portion that is paid the capacity value because it's physical energy, and then the remainder that's for the energy that gets them whole, that physical resource whole to its energy bid. And
yeah,
I'd be interested in even the MSC's opinion on that too.
And maybe the benefit to this versus just having RA resources bid non-zero in rock. Because if you're concerned about the gas prices, it seems like there's a much more direct way to deal with that.
Sorry, are we ready to take the next question, or are we still going on this one?
We
I
can
just
go ahead.
felt like there's. Go ahead.
Okay.
Ben?
I think if we have another question, we can go ahead.
Okay. Next caller, your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions, and I hope this isn't too tangential. It's a question for the CAISO, and I think it goes towards some of the discussions on the RUC side. And that's just back in November, while talking through the policy initiatives roadmap, you mentioned the development of a day-ahead reliability tool that the CAISO is developing for operators to assess 15-minute flex ramp needs when doing the RUC commitment in the current process. What's the status of that, and is there any chance that use of that tool will help kind of inform or sort of shore up the need for what's being developed here in Dane?
Yeah, this is Brad Cooper. Yeah, the day-ahead reliability tool, I think, is off the topic of what we're discussing here. You know, that's a tool to ensure that we can meet 15-minute ramps. So we'll be coming out with some more information on the day-ahead reliability tool in the near future. I think we really should keep this discussion focused on the RIN right now, because I think we're all still trying to get our heads around this RIN, and it seems like we're having a good discussion here.
Yep, that's fine. No problem, Brad. I just was curious if it was related at all, but we can keep moving. Thanks.
Yeah, we should be coming out with some more information on that. We can have another discussion on that. Ben, Scott, and Jim, what are your thoughts on I think this is kind of related to Carrie's points on the bidding incentives of these two products. Will generators continue to have the incentive to bid their marginal energy costs for energy, and do you think there are good incentives for them to bid their marginal availability costs for the RIN?
It certainly seems a lot better than trying to roll in kind of average costs of these sorts into RA contract negotiations. But Jim, your PhD thesis was actually about things like this, if I remember, in terms of multi-part bids and.
No, it was more the issue I was talking about earlier, which is how you should compare a capacity bid with an energy bid.
Okay.
Based on an uncertain usage. So, should you take a low capacity, high energy cost bid in the day ahead for RUC if you really expect to need that generator? Or should you take something with a lower energy cost, even if there's a...
And if I remember, there were some surprising results in terms of what the best bids for somebody to make were, in terms of getting very negative bids when you didn't expect that, for example. But there can be surprises, I think, was your point.
only if you design the market wrong.
We did have one more caller in the queue. Would we like to take that question?
Yes, please.
Caller, your line is unmuted.
Hi, yes, it's Mark Holman with Power. So I want to go back to a couple of callers ago on what Kerry said and the interaction between Kerry and Dr. Scott Harvey. And I really agree with Dr. Harvey's perspective. We're obviously very active in the CAISO markets. We have experience with storage. We participate as a supplier. We've also been in the past modeled as a generator, so we very much understand, from real-world participation, how this would work. And I just want to use an example. If you have a 100-megawatt generator and today you value your energy at $30 and you're willing to sell spin alternatively at $5, you can put in a 100-megawatt offer for $30 of energy. You can put in a 100-megawatt offer for $5 of spin. You can put in a PMAX of 100 megawatts, and you can let the CAISO co-optimize and allow them to award you the products that are most efficient for the CAISO, which also results in you maximizing your revenue by bidding in your marginal opportunity cost for each of those products. This is just an extension of that we can bid in our energy price, we can bid in now RCU and RCD, and the CAISO can co-optimize. So I don't think this is confusing at all. I think that having an LMP that reflects the locational marginal price of the product provided and doing that through a co-optimized approach is actually easier and more straightforward for generators, and you'll get really good price signals associated with the products that are actually valued. Trying to forecast in an RA contract how often I might be rocked and how much money I make from rock is far more difficult than submitting bids into a market that can be co-optimized where your bid price is going to be respected and your PMAX is going to be respected. So we don't see that challenge at all. I mean, as long as your offer price is respected and you've got an efficient dispatch outcome, that seems to be pretty straightforward from our perspective. Now, I do think that there are going to be resistance to change as well as to existing outcomes in the market. I mean, there is very substantial inefficiencies with doing things sequential. When you go and you rock after the IFM solution, when you go and you take those other actions, not only is that inefficient, but it then distorts real-time energy prices. It can create winners and losers because you didn't co-optimize. When you co-optimize, you get that really efficient solution of allocating the right products to the right resources and entities being able to bid in the different attributes. And I think that's really important as we move forward here on the grid. This type of solution is going to allow Northwest Hydro, if it makes sense for Northwest Hydro to be carrying flexible reserves or to be carrying RCU instead of being loaded up for energy because that's what the grid needs, this will allow it to happen. Without this, you can end up, and we often see it, where the Northwest Hydro gets loaded up for energy in the IFM, and it would have been more efficient to back that down in the evening peak so that it could ramp and be on standby as capacity instead of as energy. And I think that again, we don't see this as challenging at all from a generator perspective who actually participates in the market.
Mark, back to Carrie's point about whether this is something that we're thinking is going to become more important in the future but hasn't actually been important in the past, or actually has this been important in the past? Have you seen these inefficiencies under the present system, and do you think this will help with those?
Yeah, I think tremendous inefficiencies, because I think we see, when you see that you're seeing very sizable post-IFM, and it doesn't matter whether it's ROC, whether it's exceptional dispatch or load biasing. I understand that those different tools are being used.
You have 60 seconds.
Sometimes to acquire flexibility, sometimes to acquire capacity. But when you see those and they distort the real-time price relative to the IFM solution because they're often thousands of megawatts and they're happening morning peak, evening peak, it becomes very distortionary. And we see the example that I just saw where we look at the grid and we go, it sure would have made a lot more sense on a Sunday with a huge evening ramp to hold back Northwest Hydro as part of a co-optimized solution so it could be on standby to ramp up, but that means we need to forego an energy sale. And to forego that energy sale means you're going to lose margin, and only a co-optimized process is going to take that into consideration. What's happening now is you load up the cheapest resources with energy, and then you get to the rock and you start committing gas units that is not an efficient solution. So this is happening now, day in, day out for large volumes.
Okay. Mark, thank you. I think we're about to be cut off for lunch, and if we are cut off, can everybody please call back in at 1 o'clock? But I appreciate you addressing that point, Mark. Is that indeed the case, operator? Are we about to be disconnected?
There's no hard cutoff. We can stop the call at any point if you'd like to take lunch.
Oh, okay. I thought we just got a message. We had 60 seconds left.
Yeah, we all got a 60-second warning there. So.
Okay, if you do get cut off, I'll hear everybody at 1. But if we're not being cut off, could I check and see whether anybody would like to respond to or add to what Mark just said?
So I should point out Scott has dropped off the line.
Okay. Thank you. So at this point, Jim, if you don't have anything else to add, or James, if there's anything else that you want to say at this point, I think we can wrap up this agenda item and then take the hour break for lunch and see everybody back here at 1 o'clock for system market power mitigation. James, is that okay?
Yeah, we appreciate the discussion, and that's all we had to present for day-ahead market enhancement.
Okay. There are a lot of course, other moving parts to DAME, which we look forward to talking about in the future. That being the case, operator, we will take an hour break for lunch, and people will call back in at 1 o'clock Pacific time.
Sure thing. The lines will be disconnected. You will hear hold music on the attendee line. If you would like to disconnect, you may do so and dial back in an hour. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. Bye, everybody.